The Fellowship of the Great Physician welcomes you to House Call. Our hosts today are doctors of chiropractic, Dr. Gerald Lala and Dr. Richard Jensen, who is also a board-certified acupuncturist, practice independently in North Oaks, Minnesota. Let's join our hosts for today's program that will assist you in your quest for optimum health and well-being.
Welcome to House Call. I'm Dr. Gerald Lala. It's good to have you with us. This is part two of what do you do if you've been involved in or you've been injured in an automobile collision. And our guest again today is Thomas Bennerut. He's an attorney specializing in personal injuries. It's good to have you with us again, Tom.
Thank you.
What we covered on the previous program, people really want to get a hold of that DVD or CD, won't they? It's a tremendous amount of information on there.
I hope so.
Knowing our legal rights of the Minnesota no-fault law, and covering even if you're in an automobile or other collisions in other states, all about their insurance and things of that nature. And we finished that program talking about if you should contact an attorney and what are some of the values of that. One of the things that we didn't mention is in the Minnesota no-fault, does an attorney then charge per hour to handle a case, or how does that work?
No, in Minnesota, most personal injury lawyers, I'd say probably, if not all, the very great majority, handle cases on what's called a contingency basis, meaning that the only way that the attorney gets compensated is if they make a recovery of money for the injured person. So it's as I tell most of my clients, risk-free proposition. The only way that they get, or that I get paid, is if I help them make a recovery. They never get a bill from me or anything like that.
Wonderful. That's and that's state law. That's a decision?
Yeah, it's a decision. Yeah, and I think, probably one that I don't necessarily know the history of, but it's a situation where a lot of people, if they had to pay for the representation, they probably wouldn't pursue cases that really need to be pursued in order for people to get fair and adequate compensation.
So if we continue then, what are my legal rights if I'm involved in an automobile collision?
All right. Well, number one, you have the right to consult with a medical provider. Go to the emergency room, see a doctor, see a chiropractor.
Dentist, if a jaw injury?
Absolutely, or a chipped tooth or anything like that. Any kind of medical provider that can help treat your injuries. You have a legal right, if you're injured in a car accident, to seek out medical care.
And so are they advised just to seek their medical care from a general practitioner, medical doctor, or chiropractor, or would you be advised, like with a personal injury attorney, to be more oriented to a medical doctor or a chiropractor or a dentist who is well experienced in taking care of people who have been injured in automobile collisions?
Yeah, the best case scenario is to get someone that works with people injured in collisions so that they understand kind of the mechanics of how a collision occurs, mechanisms of injury. But mostly people there that, again, if we go back to the what we talked about in session one, somebody that a friend of yours recommended that is going to help you get better, because the goal of anybody injured in a car accident is, how do I get back to where I was before?
Okay, well, I cut you off at number one. What would be the second thing to look at?
Well, I guess in part what you want to be able to do is your legal rights are you get your medical care, but then you want to seek out, I guess, potentially counsel. But the main thing is that your legal rights are to get the care you need to get better, and then try to get the compensation that you deserve if you pass those tort thresholds and things that legally allow you to get your compensation.
Now, I've been in practice for 40-some years and have had the opportunity to take care of many people involved in automobile collisions, workman's comp injuries, and I've never really had problems with insurance companies. But what happens, I hear that some other doctors do. So what do some insurance companies do to try to interfere with medical care?
All right, well, there's a couple things they do. Insurance companies have a right under the policy to compel or make their insureds do what's called cooperate, okay? Which simply means if they decide at any point in time that they don't think that the care that's being received by the injured person is either reasonable, necessary, or related to the collision, they can send them to a doctor of their choosing, they being the insurance company, to have them seen. If the doctor they send them to decides that they no longer need the care, they'll send a letter to the injured person telling them that and say, sorry, we're not paying for any more of your bills. That's one way they do it. Some other insurance companies take what I'll call a cheaper method, and they do what's called a paper review or have the medical records reviewed to determine if the care provided is reasonable, necessary, and related, and they may stop paying then. In some other scenarios with unrepresented people, the other possibility is always the threat that bills won't be paid. And let's face it, nobody wants bills that are going to come back to them. So, one of those three ways are typically the way the insurance company will cut off the payment of medical bills or compensation under the no-fault policy.
I know I had a case once where they, for one and only I've ever had, where they told the person, look, you could find a doctor a lot cheaper. This Dr. Lala's bills, he charges too much. Well, the patient thought that that might be true for no reason, and so they went off to somebody else who was cheap, and turns out that doctor has been known to be very amenable to insurance companies, and said, well, there's really nothing wrong with you. And now the person has come back to me and said, well, I'm having all of these problems. And I said, well, I'm really sorry to hear that. And did you have an attorney? No, I didn't need an attorney. And I said, oh, you didn't? Okay. And wanted further care, but they had settled with the insurance company. So it didn't sound real good to me.
It's an unfortunate situation. And I guess a couple of lessons out of that might be probably always seek out counsel, at least know what your rights are before you sign anything or sign your rights away. More importantly, though, I think probably in that scenario, the insurance company, number one, could be found to have violated what's called the Fair Claims Practices Act. But secondly, everybody out there should be aware that the insurance company can never dictate where you go to get your care. They can't tell you have to go a certain place, just like they can't tell you where you have to get your car fixed. In the situation where you have property damage, you have a right to choose where you want to get it fixed. Just like when you have an injury, you have a right to get care from a provider that you choose. The insurance company may try to stop you from getting the care or may not want to pay your bills there, but they still can't make you, go to a certain provider other than the medical examiner they choose, which they only send you to, hopefully one time unless multiple IMEs occur throughout the life of a claim.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that if they think the doctor's bills are high or excessive in their words, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're right. It's just their opinion.
Correct.
Correct. All right. So you mentioned about going to another doctor. That term is often called an adverse medical examination or independent medical examination. Could you tell our viewers about what that involves?
Sure. Yeah, and there's a couple different terms. The insurance companies will call it an independent medical examination or an IME. I often refer to it the way you did as an adverse medical examination. Some people call it kind of somewhere in the middle, a defense medical examination. But in essence what it is it's a situation where an insurance company, either on their own or through a scheduling company, will set someone up to go see the doctor that they choose and pay.
Now, is that a doctor who works for them?
Well, it depends how you define that. I guess in essence it is in a way, but they're not directly employed by the insurance company, but the insurance company has a kind of a stable group of people that they know that do this, oftentimes through these scheduling companies.
When you use the word stable, are you referring to psychologically or a group?
A group.
A group, all right. So do those doctors then, do they have a reputation of coming up with certain opinions, or?
Again, it probably depends on who you ask. As an insurance adjuster, certainly you kind of see the same names over and over again. Same thing as an attorney. The way I look at this and the way I explain it to my clients is this. The adverse medical examiners are paid somewhere between $500 to about $1,500, to my knowledge, to see the individual and determine whether or not they need more care, and if so, whether the insurance company could pay for it. Many of them do this on a repetitive enough basis that certainly I'm sure the income becomes, who wouldn't want to get that check? As a result, because they want to continue to get those checks,
referrals.
They're going to want to, they're going to be at least inclined, whether it be, knowingly or not, I guess per se, to say what the insurance company wants. Again, certainly there are those few opinions that come back every once in a while. I can think of maybe 3 I've had in the last couple of years where the insurance company's doctor actually said the person was hurt, but it is a rarity.
In 41 years of practice, I've only had one patient who had an adverse medical exam that the doctor said that the care was legitimate and that continued care was necessitated in 41 years.
Yeah. So my record of 3 in the last couple is a good one. But yeah, it's extremely, extremely rare, and only in just the most, in fact, of the 3 I referenced, 2 of them actually were for the same gentleman because he was sent to 2 exams, so I guess really it's 2. But yeah, it is a rarity. I guess in the insurance company's defense, maybe it's a right that they have to exercise.
And we live in a democracy, so they have a right.
Correct.
Right. So what happens if the independent or the adverse medical practitioner says they need no further medical, chiropractic, or dental care?
Right. What happens from there is that the letter would go to the individual. If they're represented, it would go to their attorney, and a copy would go to that individual. At that point in time, then the attorney and the client would oftentimes speak and talk about, what should I do next? As the attorney, what I do is I proceed to file for what's called a no-fault arbitration, which is a proceeding where if the amount of bills in dispute are less than $10,000, I can go to a company called AAA, or the American Arbitration Association, and they have a process set up where we can go through and have another attorney who practices in the area of personal injury determine whether or not the insurance company should or should not pay the bills that have not been paid to date.
So that attorney is kind of like a judge or an arbitrator.
Right.
Okay.
They're a neutral, but they do have the power to decide not legal issues per se, but the issues that are in dispute with regard to, be it medical care, be it wage loss, replacement services, those sorts of things. And that decision is binding on the parties. There are, of course, can be circumstances where that may be appealable to a district court, but typically that's a binding decision that the parties have to live with.
Okay, and if I could go back to adverse medical exams again, why would insurance companies want to have an adverse medical examination?
Adverse medical examinations allow them the ability to legally stop paying for medical bills, which, the less they pay, the more money they make, the bigger their bonuses are, and so forth.
You're telling me that insurance claims adjusters do receive bonuses?
I won't say that. As an insurance adjuster, I never did that. But certainly people within the entity, whether it be an insurance agent or whether it be someone within the corporation, the more profit you have, the more money ultimately that someone will seemingly make.
That affects the stockholders as well as the officers and things of that nature.
Of course.
What about, tell me about this, you mentioned AAA, the American Association of Arbitrators, is that right?
Correct.
Who pays for that?
Well, the parties have some payment into it. As a claimant, the claimant has to pay a filing fee. Filing fee, I believe nowadays, is $50. It's paid in.
The claimant being the injured party?
Correct. Yep. In fact, and I, as the attorney, would front that and pay that in. If ultimately there's a recovery of money later, I may get that back. But there's no. If my client is injured in a collision and we end up having to file for a no-fault arbitration, they don't have to worry about writing a check. Okay. If they weren't represented, they would. But if they're represented, that's a check that my office writes to the American Arbitration Association. In turn, the other side pays an amount of money as well to do that. And ultimately, there's an attorney compensation to the arbitrator, or an arbitrator compensation, where they're also paid a $300 flat fee for spending the time to hear the case and make a decision.
So that's right. I mean, the labor is worthy of his or her pay, right?
Correct.
Okay, so what happens during the arbitration then?
Well, in an arbitration, it's a rather informal proceeding where the client and the attorney, the arbitrator, and typically one other person from the insurance company, sometimes they'll bring a witness, but we'll go to that hearing, and what it is it's a very, very abbreviated trial where each...
So is that in a courthouse then?
No, it's typically, well, it could be, I suppose, arguably, but typically it's just in an attorney's office, or if the attorney's doesn't have an office or maybe has space limitations, you can do it right at the AAA office in downtown Minneapolis. But it's a proceeding that can last anywhere from a half an hour to several hours, typically on the shorter end, hour and a half, where each side gets an opening statement, each side gets to question witnesses, direct examination, cross-examination, and do a closing argument. And then the arbitrator has 30 days from that point to make a decision.
So then myself as an injured person, if I'm representing myself and I'm not an attorney, I would certainly be at a disadvantage then.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose you could argue maybe you'd get a little more sympathy from an arbitrator if you were there alone, but I think that's probably being foolish. Without knowing how the process works, without being familiar with what you're walking into, And there are a lot of papers that are filed ahead of time. Normally we'll file a brief about, that thick or a brochure with the arbitrator ahead of time, so they know what the case is about.
Is that like almost discovery process then?
It is.
You let everybody knows what's going on?
Right.
Let's switch for a moment to doctors. As an attorney that specializes in personal injuries, what would you recommend that people look for in a good doctor?
Well, professionalism. You gotta have somebody that knows the business. And I guess interestingly, probably the same thing you look for in a good lawyer is what you look for in a good doctor. You want somebody, again, the best case scenario is always somebody that you're referred to, but you want somebody that you can trust, that you know is going to, willing to take the time to go through a history, willing to do a thorough examination, that wants to make sure you get your x-rays done, that makes sure if you have symptoms, that by doing a good evaluation that you determine that you get them to the right doctors to be seen if other specialists need to be involved in the situation. Most important, I think you just need to have somebody that's recommended, that you feel comfortable with, that's trustworthy, and somebody that really makes you know that you're going to get the proper care and that you're going to get better.
So then a professional healthcare provider that is thorough?
Absolutely.
Thorough?
Yeah.
What about checking with licensing or regulatory boards of medical doctors, chiropractors, or dentists? I think we have a slide that lists that. Maybe they can bring that up for us, and you can discuss how a person can go out there and look to see if the doctor's been in trouble or not.
Sure. Just like you'd want to, if you were going to have work done at your home, you'd want to maybe check with the Better Business Bureau. Checking with both the Minnesota Board of Chiropractic and or the Medical Board are two great ways to determine whether or not the individual you're going to see has ever had any problems, ever had their license restricted in any way, and it gives you another comfort and peace of mind. You know that the person you're seeing, fits the mold that you want to, so you can trust them and that you'll get good care.
And you could also do that with attorneys, with their regulatory agency?
Absolutely.
All right. How about if we talk a little bit about the no-fault hearings are quite informal? How long does the arbitrator, did you tell us how long the arbitrator has to make a ruling?
Yeah, the arbitrator will have 30 days from the time that the case closes. Sometimes at the end of a hearing, additional information might have to be submitted. But once the matter is closed, so essentially the parties have rested, just like you do in a court trial, like we watch on TV, and all the evidence is in, they have 30 days from that time to render a decision.
You mentioned, you used the word or term a moment ago, that you will front this expense. I didn't quite understand that.
All right.
For the arbitration.
Right. Well, here, even if you go even back earlier, a number of things that happen during the course of a case require the expenditure of money. I've got to pay in order to get something, whether it be a police report, which often only costs about $4 or $5, medical records, which will cost me $1.15 a page plus a retrieval fee. Sometimes you have to hire an expert. All those things as an attorney, what my office does is we agree to pay those costs ahead of time. And, if it should ever happen that you don't get the money back in the back and we don't make a recovery, which you never want to have happen, but arguably could, I eat those costs. I don't ever end up getting reimbursed for those. So I pay them on the front end so that the injured person, who oftentimes doesn't have the ability or the monetary ability to be able to do that, especially if they're hurt and they can't work, we pay those costs so that they get just representation, they get the outcome they deserve without having to worry about how they're going to pay for it.
That's good, isn't it?
It's great.
Good for the person. Once in a while, somebody will say to me, well, I've been involved in an accident. What is my case worth? Is that too broad of a question to ask?
Well, it's a question often asked, and many times during the first meeting, it's kind of what am I going to get out of this? And the answer always is, especially at the beginning, is it depends. Oftentimes early on, you don't know for sure the gravity of someone's injuries. You don't know how long it'll be before they're able to go back to work. You don't know for sure if a year from now they're still going to have issues that linger and that they may have for the rest of their life.
So then are you implying that if a person has had some type of bodily injury, that they might be well advised not to settle that case quickly?
Absolutely.
Is there kind of like a time frame, or isn't there a time frame?
Well, the time frame kind of varies. Oftentimes what I'll tell a new client is typically, if your case goes and you get better, okay, so it goes kind of a typical path, about a year from the time of the collision is when you look at least first considering whether or not the case should be settled. Most certainly what you just said is true, though. If that person is still having issues at a year out, I think any lawyer that tries to settle a case then is doing their client an injustice. You want to make sure that the person's either better or as good as you think they're going to be before you look at trying to settle the case.
And is that based on objective proven injuries as well as subjective? Could you discuss the difference between objective and subjective injuries?
Yeah, objective injuries are things you can see. For instance, if you have an X-ray with a broken bone, you can see that. Subjective things are more like I have a headache, or sometimes even soft tissue injuries. Although there are more and more ways we can at least try to objectify those. But headaches are something you can't see. Neck injuries sometimes involve soft tissues, or low back injuries are things you can't see.
X-rays will prove that as well as orthopedic examination.
Right, or MRIs, or lots of tests nowadays. But it's always better if you can see it, because it's always easier to convince somebody of what the injury is when you can look at it and see what it is, as opposed to just tell somebody what hurts without being able to be able to see something that shows it.
Now, in my 41 years, have really not had major problems with insurance companies. I like them. We get along well with them. We treat them as professionally, and they always treat us very professionally. And I've done seminars for insurance companies, and so I've been in their offices and see how they work and things of that nature. What, based on your experience as a personal injury specialist, what kind of things are like warning flags that the doctor may be looked at kind of obliquely by the insurance company when they look at his or her records?
Well, one of the things that oftentimes I guess is the biggest red flag is when they make the phone call and they just, oh no, tell me. But oftentimes I'll ask too. If a meeting is asked for right away after I start handling or representing a client, normally I'll always ask the question, why? If they've been in trouble in the past, which again goes back to the prior slide that they put up, you're going to be able to find out. But it's to your credit that the insurance companies respect you. It's a huge thing. And again, when you go back to that question posed before, what do you look for in a healthcare provider? You look for somebody that has a good reputation with the insurance companies. Just like in your attorney, you want someone that has a good reputation with the insurance companies. You don't want somebody that's out doing things they're not supposed to, trying to solicit patients, things like that. You want somebody that is honest, that's fair, and that, from a credibility standpoint, the insurance companies know and trust. And a lot of times they'll even, your lawyer can help you with that, but a lot of times the insurance companies will let the injured person know too when they're unrepresented, if that's the case.
Okay, because let's say that claims adjuster with XYZ insurance company doesn't really know me unless they've seen me on television or something like that. What would they then have to judge if I'm a quality care practitioner, a fair and ethical and honest individual?
Sure. Well, they're going to look at how your billing practices. They're going to look at your medical records.
So you're saying that there are some billing practices that are better than others?
Absolutely.
And how is that then? Is that like, are they organized or something, or
Correct.
handwritten, or computer generated, or
they're at least legible? No, I think one of the biggest things on a billing practice, for me at least, is where there's a set time frame where they bill, where they don't hold on to the bills for a long period of time and send them. That always kind of, I think if I were the adjuster when I was, that always made me kind of question why. But it's organization. You cooperate with them, and not to a point of ridiculousness, but where you cooperate with them and provide them with what they need. You send them a bill that's organized and that's legible. You send them the records with it so they can tell what you've done for treatment. When you do those things, you're just simply providing them with the information they need to pay the bill. And what should flow from that is that they should know that they can see that you're making a good record. They can see what you're doing. They can see the person's getting better, and they can also see your plan for where you plan to go, so that they know you want the person to get better, and you kind of have a set criteria of where you're going.
Mm-hmm. So then if they don't know me, then it's my records that say who I am.
Correct.
So then some doctors have better records than other doctors, or better record keepers? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Some doctors may have a record that looks, kind of every visit looks the same. Or maybe some have, written records are okay as long as, or handwritten as long as you can read them. But yeah, all those things play into whether an insurance company thinks they can trust the doctor and the credibility, and it helps build the reputation that you've built over 41 years.
Mm-hmm. And so if they had a spinal injury or some musculoskeletal injury, they would do physical and postural and orthopedic and neurological workup?
Correct.
And so could it be that some doctors just say, well, bend this way, that way, go to the x-ray room, or here's a prescription, or we're going to give you a massage, or here's another adjustment, or something like that? Does that kind of wave a little red flag, saying that maybe the doctor is a little prone to taking shortcuts that may send indications to the insurance company that the doctor may be a corner cutter?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you want somebody that's going to take the time just to rule out the worst things, if nothing else, and to make sure that you get a good plan, or you can set a good plan in place to go forward and treat.
So then, even though a patient may not have a medical background like you do, and be able to, you must have analyzed thousands of doctors' records over the years, so you have a pretty good idea of what doctors are thorough and ones that aren't. What about the patient? They don't have that background. Could they ask to see the doctor's records, or?
Well, you know, they could, whether or not even...
They have a legal right to do that?
Absolutely, you have a right to get your records. But again, it may go back to, even in that scenario, if without having something to compare it to, you know, if they don't have it to compare to anything, they may not know what's good and what's bad. But if, you know, that's why the personal referral, again, seems to be a theme here today, but the personal referral is always the best referral.
And so then it goes back to an attorney who is experienced in this area of auto collisions, who has looked at all kinds of doctor, hospital, clinic records, has a good idea what doctors do keep good records and dispense treatment based on legitimate objective findings.
Correct.
That the attorney could say pretty well up front, look, I think maybe this doctor may be a wonderful personality or something like that. You might be getting better, but you might be shortchanged on the record keeping.
That's certainly a possibility.
And that could affect then not only the insurance company's opinion, but an arbitrator's opinion, and in the settlement of the case, not just on personal injuries, but the liability aspect?
Correct. Poor record keeping could affect you with your getting your bills paid, with prevailing at an arbitration, and ultimately with winning at a trial.
So,
or even with getting a fair settlement in your case.
So again, important to know who you're dealing with, to deal promptly. What about taking pictures of damages to your automobile? Is that a good idea?
Always a good idea. We kind of talked about that a little in the first session too, about the nowadays with our cell phones with the cameras. But yeah, I mean, preserving evidence as best you can is always a great idea. You know, that way, not that damage always equates with either in the worst, you know, collisions with injury, or in minor, you know, property damage with no injury. There's not always a direct correlation, but it's always better to preserve the evidence than you have it for later if you need it.
And attorneys who are specialists in auto collisions, personal injuries, they're the record keepers.
Correct.
They're the ones who document to make sure that everything is, all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed.
Right.
And it's unfortunate that accidents occur. We call them collisions. Sometimes it's no fault of our own. But my experience is that not only do we need professional health care providers looking after people, not just people who are runners, you know, going after, standing at the, what do they call them years ago? Ambulance chasers, that's what they call them years ago. But that you have attorneys who are specialists in that area and who can legally protect you, represent you, be your counsel, be your advocate. And then, as you said, most attorneys don't charge a fee. Do they get some type of a fee at the end?
If I help the injured party obtain a settlement, which oftentimes happens, then we get a fee off that, which is typically 1/3, with the remainder, after expenses are taken out, to go to the injured person.
And so that's pretty common in attorneys in Minnesota?
Correct.
It's not a law, though. It's just a policy.
Correct.
Okay. Well, we've enjoyed having you with us again today. Mr. Benarut is going to be just...
House Call TV has been brought to you by the Fellowship of the Great Physician. For further information, please call at 651-484-8521 or visit our website at www.housecalltv.org. Until next time, thank you for listening to House Call.